In this unit, we will learn how to use some alternative export panels. We will see how to use the export for screen as well as the asset export panels. You don't necessarily have to use them, but they can perhaps improve your workflow, so definitely worth giving them a try. Let me show you how. So the first thing that we're going to have a look at is the Export for Screens panel. You'll find it under File and then Export, Export for Screens. You can also see the shortcut right next to it. As you can see on this panel here, we have the artboards that we are working on, and you can click and unclick this little box here in order to define if you want to export them or not. And you can either select all or a specific range, and if you want to include or not the bleed. You can select from here the location, which I'm going to export them on my desktop, and if you want to open the location after the export, and if you want to create some subfolders based on the scale or on the format. So I'm going to disable those two ones. I'm not really in a need to organize them, but if you do have lots of exports, that might be quite handy. Or actually, let's leave it on so you can have a look on how it's going to arrange the different assets. So from here now, we can decide what scale do we want to export at. So I'm going to leave it on the normal scale, so 1. And then I'm going to export, let's go with the PNG. Or if you want, you can select from the drop down, let's say JPEG instead. If you add scale, you can export a second time these assets, and you can define if you want to export a different scale. So let's say I want double the size, and I want it this time, to be PNG. You can see here from, if I scroll up, that I'm going to export 1 JPEG and 1 PNG. And let's add another one perhaps. So I want to export with a specific width of, let's say 200 pixels, another JPEG. Once you're happy with all the parameters that you added here and how many assets you want to export and with how many formats and how many scales you want to export them, you press Export Artboard and you can see the message that's been successfully completed. And if I'm gonna go to my desktop, you will see that I have a JPEG folder with all the JPEGs that I exported in both the original size and the smallest size that I asked for. So you can see 200 pixels and the original size. And I can also see the folder with the PNGs that I exported and the original size. So let's jump back to Adobe Illustrator. What happens now if I'm working on something and I'm like, oh, I actually want to export just this ear. It's kind of on canvas that's going to be exactly the size that this ear is. In order to do so, you probably need to create a new canvas on the size of this ear and then select on the export the specific canvas, the specific artboard, and so on. Another way is to go to Window and then select the Asset Export option. It's going to pop you up this panel here, and it allows you to drag any artwork on this panel in order to create multiple assets afterwards. So I'm going to grab my ear, drag and drop it here, and you see that it created a little canvas just with my ear. I can say that I wanted normal scale a PNG, and then I want double scale a JPEG, and so on. I can add as many exports for that asset as I want. I press Export, and I'm going to export it again on the desktop, which in general I wouldn't suggest. I would strongly suggest you to organize your files based on the project and the folders. And then if I'm going to jump to my desktop, I should be able to see on the PNG folder that I selected the asset number 1, which is a PNG that has only the ear on a canvas that perfectly fits the ear itself. So I find this export assets really handy, especially when I want to quickly export something and check if it's working or not, to just drag and drop it in there. And of course I could also, like for example, drag multiple assets or even a combination of 2 or more assets at the same time, so I don't need to manually select each of them and drag it in there. Those two options of exporting your work can really save you some time, especially when it comes to multiple like assets and sizes and formats, it can be super handy. Now let's move on to the final practical phase.